Good evening, delegates, to the 2024 Korea Peace Conference. I'd like to thank for inviting me to speak tonight. The topic that I'm going to speak about, the mistakes that America has made in the 20th century and how we can overcome them for peace and prosperity. They're in a book that I will shamelessly plug that I co-authored. Now, the theories are not mine, they're my co-authors, but nonetheless, I'm here to present them. And so if you like the theories, then my co-author gets the credit. If you don't, then blame me. And I brought 15 copies of the book, which I will give away for free in exchange for you giving a donation to KAPAC. How does that sound? Free book in exchange for a donation to KAPAC. Okay, so I'm not going to beat around the bush. I'll dive right into what were the mistakes that the United States made in foreign policy, and that is the Cold War. And the Cold War is in quotes. We'll talk about why it's cold in quotes, but nonetheless, that Cold War, we say, is a mistake. Why was it a mistake? Did we really win it? Is Russia today a free democracy? I don't think so. Are we, the United States, are we purely a capitalistic society? I don't think so. We actually passed Medicare during the height of the Cold War in 1965, and in 2010 we passed Obamacare. So we're far from a capitalistic society. And then, of course, part of the Cold War was the Korean War. Now, the Korean War is in a state of armistice, but that doesn't mean that the war is over. All that means is that the bullets have stopped flying for the most part, but the guns are still fully loaded, pointed at each other with fingers on the trigger. And I say for the most part because you probably remember in 1999, 2002, and 2010, there was some bullets flying on the island of Pyongyang. So that's why it's for the most part. And obviously because the fingers are on the trigger on the guns, the bullets can resume flying at any time. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, in the Yellow Sea. So, and the second mistake was that unlike Germany, in which the United States forced the Germans to pay reparation and atone for their war crimes, we never did that with Japan. So we should do that with Japan. So those were the two mistakes. So now let's I'd like to dive into the Cold War. But first, I promise you I'll talk about why is it cold in quotes, because it's fair to say it's a Cold War only in Europe. In Asia, it was a hot war. About 10 million people died due to this Cold War in Asia. So in Asia, it was not a Cold War. It was a very hot war, right? The Koreans lost 3 million, the Chinese lost 4 million, the Vietnamese lost 3 million. Very hot war in Asia. So basically, we need to ask the question, how did the Cold War start? Because those same communists that we decided are enemies during the Cold War, they were our allies in the war against Hitler, right? So the question is, what happened? How did that happen? So basically, in the Pacific, World War II should be seen as two separate wars: the European theater and the Pacific theater. So in the European theater, the Soviet Union, those communists were with us 100% allies against Hitler. But against Japan, the Soviet Union did not participate in the war, and they actually fought a separate war. They did not participate until October 8, 1945. So this was a week before Japan surrendered, and after we already dropped the first bomb on Hiroshima. And what the Soviet Union was mainly interested in was recovering the areas, the territories that they lost in the 1904-1905 Russo-Japanese War, which is half of it, Sakhalin Island and the Kuril Islands. So in order to answer the question, how did we go almost overnight from allies to enemies, let's take a look at these two pictures. On the left, you can see from February 1945, you have the three leaders of the UK, US, and USSR, the Soviet Union, and they're Winston Churchill, Franklin Roosevelt, and Joseph Stalin. This is February 1945. before Germany surrendered. 5 months later, we now have a different composition of the same positions. Replacing Churchill was Clement Attlee, and there's an asterisk there because what happened was Churchill lost the election in early July, so he actually attended the conference and then was replaced during the conference when when Clement Attlee took over. In April of 1945, Franklin Roosevelt died, so he was replaced by Harry Truman, but Stalin was still there, okay, between July and February. So our theory is that basically Douglas MacArthur, he was the commander of US forces in the Pacific during World War II. He basically took advantage of Harry Truman, who was new and not quite as experienced, and basically pressured him into starting this new Cold War. Now, remember, as I said, there were two separate wars, one in Europe, one in the Pacific. In Europe, we had George Patton. In the Pacific, we had General MacArthur. So he came out, he was a big hero, he just won a war, and he wanted to remain relevant. But if you don't have a war, you're not really relevant. That's how the military works. So basically, he pressured. He basically pressured. In our theories, that he pressured Truman to not to trust Stalin, even though Stalin was our ally over in Europe, right? And it wasn't until 1951 that Truman decided he had enough of MacArthur and fired him. Now, I didn't put this down, but in 1973, after Truman had died, he said that he did not fire MacArthur because he was a dumb son of a bitch. He fired MacArthur because he was a dumb son of a bitch who wouldn't take orders. So now remember that back then, the heads of the military were much more powerful than they are today. For example, the head of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, he headed the FBI from 1924 to 1972, 48 years. All those presidents feared him. Only God took him away. In 2017, you may remember, Donald Trump, how did he fire James Comey, the head of the FBI? He told him on television, "You're fired." So it was a very, very different. So basically, Truman, new president, he feared MacArthur, just fell for MacArthur's scare tactics that Stalin is bad, so we therefore should fear him and to have this Cold War, which in Asia was hot. And even though Truman fired MacArthur, by 1951 the damage was already done, so we had to go through 45 years of this quote-unquote Cold War. So this is, the U.S. is in a Cold War with the communists. How did the Korean become involved in this Cold War? Because when the U.S. came into and occupied Korea in 1945, after the Japanese surrendered, the U.S. military conducted a survey, and 77% of the population of the Korean population south of the 38th parallel supported the communists. So obviously, hating the communists was not a Korean agenda; it was an American agenda. So, and why did they support the communists? Because during the 35 years of Japanese occupation, the Communist Party was the most effective way to resist the Japanese occupation. So even though we, the American, we came and liberated Korea, that doesn't mean that all of a sudden the Korean people will hate the communists. They're still communists. And the mistake that the United States made was thinking that, if the Korean like the communists, that means they love the Soviet Union. No, it was not any specific love for the Soviet Union. It was because that was how the Korean people resisted the Japanese occupation. So obviously, you don't have 77% of the Korean population supporting communism today. So how did that change? Well, we got to look at who the Soviet Union put to head the North Korea and who the US put to head South Korea. In North Korea, the Soviet Union, they put Kim Il-sung, who was very popular at the time because he won a battle over Japan in Bochombo in 1937. And he also entered with Soviet Union into Korea when on August 10, 1945, along with the Soviet forces. So he helped liberate Korea. Of course, the real liberator were the two atomic bombs, but nonetheless, symbolically, he helped come and liberate Korea. On the other hand, who did we, the US, install in the South? We installed Syngman Rhee, who was hated by the South Koreans, by the Koreans in the south of the 38. He, unlike Kim Il-sung, who fought the Japanese, Syngman Rhee, he spent most of the time, most of the 35 years of occupation in the US. He was not even on the peninsula or fighting the Japanese. He was not a military person. And to add insult to injury, he was the president of the Korean Provisional Government in Shanghai from 1919 to 1925, and he was impeached. And why was he impeached? Because the government saw him as acting more in the interest of the U.S. than in the interest of the Korean people. So here we have an impeached foreign president that we, the U.S., are ramming down the throats of the Korean people. And why did we ram him down? Because he spoke very good English. he did all his bachelor's, master's, and PhD in the United States. So he spoke perfect English, but unfortunately that doesn't do well in Korea, right? So the way he held on to power is what he did when you're hated, you murder your opponents, right? So all those communists, he basically rounded up on the island of Jeju, and there was the Jeju massacre, 40,000 people that he eliminated. Now, of course, that only lasts so long, right? 7 years after the armistice, the Korean people revolted and kicked him out, and there were 2 years of relative freedom. But then another dictator, Park Chung-hee, came in, and it wasn't until 1987 that the Korean people were truly got democracy. So that's basically how all of a sudden this U.S. Cold War against communism became a Korean War against communism. Okay, so we can't go back to the past and redo things. We can only move forward. So what can we do to make up for those mistakes that we made in the past? Okay, so we got to end the Korean War, right? At least in the first 40 years, from 1950 to the early 90s, at least the Korean War was part of the Cold War, cold in quotes, because it was the war in communism. Now, there's just no purpose to this war. And also, we also have to press the Japanese to basically take responsibilities for all those war crimes they committed while occupying the Korean Peninsula, and atone for the same. And they need to stop honoring their war criminals. Here's a photo from the Yasukuni Shrine. They actually still have war criminals buried there. So we, the United States, we need to pressure Japan to rebury them somewhere less prominent than this shrine. So what can we do to help the Korean people achieve their dream of reunification? So I'm sure a lot of you are in real estate, so you know how in real estate the most important thing is in real estate is location, location, location. So we need to end the Korean War, end the Korean War, end the Korean War. But that's only the first step. We then have to do a lot of compromising. and also set up a transitionary period, which I'll talk about. And this is like my vision of how we can reunify the Korean people. So honestly, we can't talk about reunification unless the two sides recognize each other. Right now, the two sides don't recognize each other. Although I gotta say that the developments in December of 2023, that now Kim Jong-un sees South Korea as an enemy, that means at least he sees South Korea as an entity, right? Before that, it was just a puppet. Yeah. So I actually see that as a positive development, even though most people probably don't. So, but we've got to have mutual recognition. So, and the problem is we're not going to really get mutual recognition unless the United States recognizes North Korea. So, and of course, there's no mutual recognition without an end to the Korean War. Now, I have all this text in gray because I also have ideas on how we can help the Chinese to reunify, just like the Koreans. But since this is a Korea conference, I grayed it out. But if anybody wants to know my ideas for how to reunify China, talk to me afterwards. Okay. So now let's talk about compromises. So I have here a map of Germany, because the Germans had to reunify. There are different circumstances, but I'll explain. So all those different areas, you have the blue, the yellow, the green, and the pink, and the orange there. Those are all areas. This is a map of Germany before the German Empire before World War I. So the yellow and orange are areas that the Germans had to that they lost as a result of World War I, and then the green and pink, those are areas that the Germans lost as a result of World War II. And then they were split, East and West Germany. But in 1990, when they reunified, one of the conditions for reunification was that they had to forever cede any claim to all those areas that they lost. That was a condition for reunification. So basically, even though the Korean reunification is very different from the Germany reunification, because Germany was split as a punitive punishment for their war crimes. The Koreans were not split to punish them for war crimes. There's a similarity, and I'll show you what I mean here. There's the Nokton-do. It used to be an island. It's no longer an island. Over in the mouth of the Tumen River. So it used to be an island, but then over the years, sediments gathered and basically clogged this over here, so it's no longer an island. It used to be Korean territory, but in 1860, China, the Qing dynasty, they were forced to cede all of outer Manchuria to the Russian Empire. And this former island, even though it didn't belong to China, it belonged to Korea, it got transferred by mistake. So basically, it's been in dispute since then. But then in 1990, North Korea formally ceded it to Russia. So of course, North Korea ceded it. That doesn't mean that South Korea recognizes it. So South Korea still claims it. So I'm saying that what's better, a reunified Korea living in peace, or a war with Russia over this former island? So I think that just like the Germans had to cede territory as a condition for reunification, I think the Koreans may have to relinquish that small non-island that is not even accessible because it's on the other side of the river. So that's what I mean by compromise. You have to compromise, because the greater good is, of course, reunification over claim to this small piece of territory. And remember, this is all because North Korea is a sovereign Korean nation that freely ceded. They were not under pressure. Now I want to talk about what I mean by we'll have to set up transitionary period. And I'm not sure if you know how in Hong Kong you have 50 years of transitionary period of two systems, one country. So I want to give a little bit of background, because I envision that for a reunified Korea too. So I'll give a little bit background. In 1841, the Chinese lost that island over there on the bottom due to as a result of the First Opium War. And then 1860, they lost the pink area, the Kowloon Peninsula, as a result of the Second Opium War. And then in 1898, the British, they acquired all these new territories, but it was a lease. It was not won by war. So the first two territories, the British got, the Chinese were, they ceded it for eternity, for perpetuity, never to be returned. But that's not true for the new territories. So what happened was, as the British developed Hong Kong, they didn't pay attention to what area will be returned, what areas will not be returned. I'm showing here at the bottom a photo of what's called Boundary Street, which is the street a street that separates the new territory from the Kowloon Peninsula. And you can see how you can't tell the difference between the two. So in the 80s, as the clock was winding down to return the new territory to the Chinese, the British were trying to figure out how they're going to separate the new territory that they have to return from the territories that they gained as a result of the war. So Deng Xiaoping, basically to sweeten the deal, he said to the British, if you give me the other two territories, the Kowloon Peninsula and the Hong Kong Highland, that you don't have to, I'll set up this system called one country, two systems for 50 years. And the British said, okay, fine. And that brought an end to 156 years of British occupation of Hong Kong. But of course, and so in 2047, July 1st, 2047, Hong Kong, that transitional period will end, and Hong Kong will be just another Chinese city. So I'm kind of envisioning this transitional period for North-South Korean reunification that will have to, because the two countries have such different systems. So my guess is that you reunify, and then you have one representation in the UN, and then two systems. So for example, you have the holiday of Hangul Day, right, to celebrate the Korean alphabet. In the South, they celebrate Hangul Day on October 9th. In the North, which is the day, to commemorate the day that it became effective, the alphabet became effective. Whereas in the North, they don't even call it Hangul Day, they call it Joseongul Day, and they celebrate it on January 15th. So, got to figure out when to celebrate it. Now, of course, I as an American, I'm not going to tell the Korean people when to celebrate their alphabet, but I will say this: they should celebrate the alphabet, because it's a wonder. Yesterday I met somebody who was an expert on linguistics, and linguists don't know of any other alphabet that's in human use in which it is known who invented that alphabet, King Sejong, and when it was invented. So it's the only alphabet that exists. So definitely something to celebrate. And we can figure out the details of when to celebrate it or how to call it. As far as I'm concerned, we can do it on November 27th, which is halfway between October 9th and January 15th. But I'll let the Korean people figure that out. So with that, thank you very much. And I don't know if we have time for questions and answers. Do you want to do that, or do you want me to go into the details of HR 1360?
Yeah, go ahead.
Questions?
No, just go ahead.
Okay, go ahead with the next one. Okay. So we're all here to promote HR 1369. So Casey asked me to put together what exactly is HR 1369. And so I put together 3 pages, and I actually printed it out so that when we go to more to congressional offices, we can hand that over so they can see what's in those pages. And I must say that it is very, very modest. If I would have written it, it would have been much more ambitious. But I didn't write it, so we have to go with what's in the bill. So the first thing is that you'll notice it requests. What does request mean? That means if the Secretary of State doesn't want to do it, can't do anything. So it requests that the U.S. Secretary of State enter into negotiations with the DPRK to establish liaison offices, not embassies, in Washington, D.C. and Pyongyang. So it's just a request. Doesn't have to do that. And just to remind everybody, at the 2022 Korea Peace Conference, Congressman Sherman told us that this bill is not really necessary because obviously if the Biden administration wants to do it, they can do it. They don't need a bill to pass Congress to do that. So that's the first point. The second is it directs. So that means the Secretary of State must submit a report to Congress for a plan to end the Korean War. So just a report, and they got to do it. The Secretary of State must do it within 180 days, and it must be unclassified. But there's a loophole, as they say, loophole big enough to drive a truck through, because you can have a classified appendix, so the unclassified report can be 3 words: see classified appendix. And I'm not a lawyer. The bill doesn't talk about what's the punishment if the Secretary doesn't comply. So I don't know what's the consequence, if it means that they're in contempt of Congress or what. But I just note that the bill does not specify punishment for not following it. And then finally, the last thing that the bill does is it directs the Secretary of State not to cancel the travel ban, but to clarify conditions under which there are exceptions to the ban. So there are certain exceptions. One of them is in the national interest of the United States. So the bill tells the Secretary of State to define what does that mean. What does it mean in the national interest? Another one is compelling human considerations, and that one it specifically asks the Secretary of State whether attending or witnessing funerals, burials, or religious and family commemorations qualifies as compelling human considerations. So it specifically asks the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of State has to provide an answer within 180 days, and it must be unclassified, but can have a classified appendix. Although on this one, I can't see how they can use that as a loophole. So what is not in HR 1369? So there's no requirement to end the Korean War. I guess that's a little too ambitious. There's no requirement to formally recognize North Korea. There's no lifting of the travel ban. There's no impact to the Mutual Defense Treaty between the U.S. and the Republic of Korea. And there's no impact to the U.S. forces in Korea. And there's no lifting of sanctions against North Korea. So again, I got those 3 pages on a piece of paper, so when we go into groups, I can hand them, so we can provide it to the congressional offices when we speak tomorrow. So that's it.